YouTube is connecting. As you can see, last minute I came up with a topic. See what I can throw together here for tonight. See if we get some other folks come and join us. What the heck did I just do here? Oh, that's what I did. Okay. Excuse me. That's three of us. We're at 7:02. I'm going to give it another minute or so, and then we'll get talking a little bit about marijuana. Excuse me. Well, 7:03. We're good. But anybody else that joins in can ask any questions if they've missed anything important, or catch up, or watch later on YouTube. But as we always start our meetings, welcome to our folks that are visiting with us here live, and also any of our guests that are watching on YouTube later on. All of our meetings are an environment of education and awareness and are not an open market for the sale, purchase, or distribution of cannabis. We do not encourage or condone illegal behavior of any kind. You'd think I've had that memorized by now. I've been saying it for a couple of years, and I still have to read it every time. All right, close that window out. And kind of get our conversation started tonight. As some of you may know, I've been a little sluggish the past couple weeks, actually a good portion of this year, with different medical things going on. I had a surgery in my nose about a week and a half ago. Things are doing pretty darn well with that. I still have a little numbness in a couple teeth, probably from some swelling or something around some nerves up in there. And I'm finally starting to feel kind of normal, not stuffy headed. And I must admit, a lot of the past week and a half, I felt like I had a head cold without maybe some of the body aches and stuff like that. So thankfully, that's kind of clearing up. And today was actually able to head on down to Folly, take a little short walk on the beach, and check out some of the pure destruction, deconstruction that they're doing down there. With the fogginess, I've been a little bit slow on the uptake on coming up for our topic tonight, and along with other things that have to do with normal business. Um, Thankfully, we pulled off our monthly meeting last Tuesday. Um, and we actually did an open house on Thursday, part of Nationals 50th anniversary, their national conference. We were asked to um, have an open house in case anybody had any questions and wanted to come in and visit with us. Um, so we did that, and I actually had some visitors asking some questions about the organization here in South Carolina. And I think that was pretty successful. Outside of doing those kind of things, though, like I say, I've dropped the ball a lot in the past couple of weeks. And so now I think things are going to be turning around a little bit. I do have another dreaded appointment this week with the sinus guys. They put me in severe pain last time, and I'm not looking forward to that. Anyway, let me go ahead and let somebody else in the room here. I did finally, after chatting with Kristen yesterday morning at our weekly meeting, um, tell her that I would come up with a topic for tonight, and I tried to think about it a little bit through the day. I expected to actually have some information out about it yesterday, um, but just again completely dropped the ball. But I did find a couple of good videos, posted them out there this morning. I tried to keep them all mostly on the short side, a couple of minutes, 5 minutes tops. I think one of them may have been a little bit longer, talking a bit about the history of marijuana in the United States and how it became illegal and how we got to where we are today. Um, so I'm going to kind of start with, let me change a little screen here. Uh, Going into that just a little bit about the history, and I'm sure some of you, if not all of you, have a pretty good knowledge about this kind of stuff, but just to sort of flush it out for everybody and for the video, we're going to go into that a little bit here. Desktop one, desktop two. Let me hit my share button. Go ahead and hide this calendar because we don't need that open right now. And we should be able to see this screen here. This is a blog, the Daily Californian. I have no idea how I came across this, but I thought it was a pretty good um, article on the history compared to a couple of the others that I was reading. Another one over here I'm going to click to real quick. This is Brookings Institute. Brookings Institute, actually, I'll talk about this one a little bit more, but they're talking about uh, police reform, drug reform today, and we'll go into that in a little bit and talk about that. But as you can see, even just from the graphic, we've got information on the history of marijuana pre 1906, and actually we'll scroll down just a little bit.
This is Mike. I can't see their screen. I see your desktop and not that. There you go. Thank you.
I drug it over to my other screen for ease for me, forgetting that you guys are only viewing my one screen here. There we go. Okay. So we can see this graphic up here on this blog. Let me go back. This is the dailycal.org. This was from a few years ago, 3 years ago on 420. Making a Menace, Abridged History of Marijuana. I kind of liked the title of it, Making a Menace. And as you'll see from just some of this information here, real quick, in the 1600s, domestic production of hemp in 13 colonies. They grew it in all of the 13 original colonies. Virginia Assembly in 1619 required farmers to grow hemp. It was used as legal tender on the East Coast before the Civil War. I don't think Virginia was the only. Somebody's having trouble logging in, I see. I don't think Virginia was the only one that was actually paying farmers, requiring farmers. Some states were actually paying farmers a subsidy to grow cannabis, I believe. But yeah, it was um, mandatory at some point to be growing hemp. And if some of you watched some of the videos from earlier or that I had shared, they talk a little bit about the word marijuana and how it really wasn't even used in the United States until the early 1900s. So as we're moving up in here, we'll see in 1850, marijuana was added to the pharmacopoeia as cannabis. And that's what it was known as. It was known as cannabis, or it was known as hemp, or the Indian hemp plant. Um, it treated various symptoms such as opioid addiction or opiate addiction, alcoholism, leprosy, excessive menstrual bleeding. Now, I'm not sure how much faith I have in medicine from the 1850s. We've come a long way from that. But, you know, in the pharmacopoeia, it's not listed in here, but about oh, I forget the number. I think it was over 50% of the medicines in the pharmacopoeia um, had cannabis in them or was cannabis based. In 1906, now this is kind of interesting and important, is the President Teddy Roosevelt signs the Pure Food and Drug Act, or the Wiley Act, requiring label of over the counter remedies. Alcohol, morphine, opium, heroin, and marijuana are labeled addictive and or dangerous. So that was sort of one of the first labelings of them as an addictive or dangerous substance. And you can see right there, it's right in with opium, morphine, heroin, marijuana. It just shouldn't fit. A lot of the early 1900s to about the 1920s and even into the 30s, as we'll see, there were fear in a lot of the communities because more Mexicans were moving over the border from Mexico into the United States, and they were bringing with them their cannabis, their marijuana, um, and they were smoking it, and this was putting the fear of uh, in fragile white people back at the time. Claims are rising the marijuana is going to cause men of color to become violent, solicit sex from white women. And these were all preludes to the Marijuana Stamp Act. This was before it actually became illegal in 1937 at the federal level. Um, Down below, it may go in, but there were certain towns, almost like ordinances in small towns and cities and states, that started to outlaw it. As a matter of fact, you can see it down here. Uh, by 1931, 29 states had outlawed marijuana. By 34, the United States Narcotic Act urges the states to accept the responsibility for marijuana control. Reefer Madness film came out in 36, and of course, in 37, the Marijuana Stamp Act was passed as part of the Evil Weed National Campaign criminalizing marijuana and restricting access. But then, of course, in the 40s, during World War II, Hemp for Victory, a government-made film, promotes farming of wartime needs. So it's really only the devil's weed, and it's only really a bad thing on certain days for the government, and then other days it's okay. Um, as many of us know, and we'll probably see that later in the history, the government holds a patent on cannabis in conjunction with some other organizations. 1960s counterculture. President Kennedy, Johnson Commission research. Um, of course, a lot of us know the 60s. There's the hippie era, flower power. It was also a very big civil rights era. Um, Matter of fact, that's sort of where I view um, a lot of the pushback from the Nixon administration and the political right came as sort of retaliation for passing um, civil right legislation in the 60s. Um, in 1970, National Organization of Marijuana Reform of Marijuana Laws, NORML, was founded. We are in our 50th anniversary year. It's my understanding, technically, the bylaws and incorporation paperwork weren't actually drafted until 71. But the way the nonprofit organization stuff, I know when we first founded ours, we had like 17 months or something from founding until we filed all of our paperwork. Um, and then what it doesn't mention in this little history here is in about 1968, 69, I think it was 1968, a professor Timothy Leary was arrested for marijuana possession, and he pushed it to the Supreme Court as being an unconstitutional arrest. And the Supreme Court in 1968 69, based on Timothy Leary's case, um, found that the 1937 Marijuana Stamp Act was unconstitutional, and they overturned that, uh, setting our government into a scramble. And that's where the Nixon administration then came up with the Controlled Substances Act, and that's where they classified the drug marijuana as a Schedule One drug, the same as heroin, the same as LSD. At that time, most marijuana came in from Mexico and Colombia, but Mexico begins herbicide treatment with paraquat, and some of you all may remember that if you're as old as I am. It was actually kind of a concern for young teenage and I guess older cannabis consumers back in that early 70s time is, am I going to get something with this chemical sprayed on it that the government's paying, and that, is it going to do me any harm? Um, I'm not sure why they put the Reagan and Bush administration stuff here before the Safer Commission, but anyway, they talk about the Reagan and Bush administration enforce stricter smuggling penalties, um, indirectly encourages domestic cultivation in Hawaii and California. And when we talk about Reagan on that, Reagan did start ramping up the war on drug during his administration. One of the things for here in South Carolina, and you may have heard me mention it before on some of these meetings. The book Jackpot is about the marijuana smuggling in South Carolina when Henry McMaster was a young attorney general at the time. And he decided to jump on board the Reagan administration's war on drugs and make a name for himself. And started going after marijuana smugglers here in South Carolina. Um, he hasn't changed his opinions on that, as far as I can tell. 50 years, 50, well, not quite 50 years, because a lot of that was the late 70s, early 80s. But again, if we go down to this next line, the Schaefer Commission says marijuana isn't bad. Nixon doesn't care. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 required that a study be done within the first 2 years, and that was now what's known as the Schaefer Commission study. And the Schaefer Commission study basically came back after the 2 year period and says, "Hey, we've done some studies that we were told to do, and marijuana isn't that bad. We should really just decriminalize it, pull it off this schedule." And okay, sorry about that. I got a message come in. And his attitude basically was, "I don't care. I do not care if it's not bad. We want it illegal." And there was an interview of his domestic policy advisor, John Ehrlichman, in 1994. Don't know if it mentions it here in the story, but basically what John Ehrlichman had stated was, um, if we could criminalize marijuana and criminalize heroin and associate the hippies with the criminalized marijuana and associate the blacks with criminalizing of heroin, we could go and raid their homes. We could vilify them on the news on a nightly basis. We could, disrupt their efforts. We could keep them from voting against us. It was really a very, very big political move to keep this illegal, to criminalize that behavior so they could specifically lock up the blacks, as Nixon put it, is the blacks and the hippies. So liberal leaning, left leaning, um, more or less political uh, lean, political feelings. And now, mind you, this was after. Now, I grew up and I was a little boy during the 60s. I was not in the colleges. I was not there, Kent State or any of the others that, these disasters have happened at. Um, but uh, that was a time in the 60s where, the news was for the first time being kind of televised pretty regularly. We had the Vietnam War being televised on a regular basis, and a lot of the protesting going on at that time was really anti-war protesting. Let's get out of Vietnam, that kind of stuff. There was also, a very big civil rights movement back then. As a matter of fact, I just saw that. Don't remind me again. Um, I actually have one of my searches on another screen here. I want to do a little bit of research into the Black Panthers at the time because I mean, if overall in history they've been vilified, but when you get into looking at what their causes were, they were fighting for the same things we're pretty much fighting for today. Um, they were just as frustrated as we are, I think, today sometimes with our government. But let me go on, continue in our history. Drug enforcement, the DEA, they claim basically created in 73. It was kind of created along with, I thought, the Controlled Substances Act, but I might need to update my own education on that. High Times was founded in 74. A parents' era anti-marijuana movement support the DEA and National Institute for Drug Abuse. Led to the 80s drug war. National Institute on Drug Abuse, NIDA, I don't know how exactly they pronounce it, but this is one organization that spends millions of tax dollars, spreads it around the nation. As a matter of fact, it was a couple of years ago, there was a group and a website here in South Carolina. Got something in chat. Oh, hello. Hi, everybody. Um, in South Carolina called thebluntruth.org. And it was basically an anti-marijuana propaganda group based out of the Beaufort area. They had gotten, oh, geez, I believe it was $500,000 grant from NIDA. I don't know whether, even if this, I'm assuming the organization is still there. I hear very little about them, but I think it was supposed to be a $500,000 grant spread over a 4-year period, about $125,000 a year. And this group was kind of going into our schools along with law enforcement and then spreading anti-marijuana propaganda. Had an anti-marijuana website out there, thebluntruth.org. That's no longer out there. And of course, me as an activist, I want to know, where'd all this money go? I mean, that was a lot of money, and that's only one organization in South Carolina that NIDA gave money to spread propaganda in marijuana. Okay. That's my little tangent on NIDA there off of that comment. 10 years later, Anti-Drug Abuse Act increases penalties and introduces mandatory sentencing, institutes the Street 3 strike law. 86. For some reason, I thought that was all part of the 1994 crime bill when they instituted 3 strike rules. But over the years, and especially you'll see it a lot at election times, especially if you're listening to um, elections for local sheriffs or that kind of thing throughout the country, especially district attorneys. They want to be tough on crime. They're telling you how they're going to battle crime, battle the war on drugs, and a lot of what that is just ways of trying to grab more taxpayer dollars and militarized law enforcement agencies, and none of it has really been to rehabilitate. If they really wanted to try and fight a war on drugs, maybe they should invest some money into rehabilitation and not into locking people into prisons and into uh, violence against people just because they're smoking a little weed. Um, So anyway, but that happens, and it happens every year, and it's been happening, year after year after year, or election cycle after election cycle. Anyway, throughout our nation, every time there seems to be, another attorney general or another district attorney or another sheriff or judges positions, we're going to be tough on crime. We're going to take more of your money, and we're going to fight these, druggies. And then what do we have? Like results of our most recent surveys, more than half of the arrests are for nonviolent drug crimes. There are more arrests for nonviolent drug crimes than for all violent crimes combined. Um, is this really making our country a safer place? California, 1996. Oh, I'm going to back up. I forgot George Bush and his war on drugs, George H.W. So yeah, every president or a lot of presidents, they're going to come in and their new war on drugs, and they're going to amp it up and just say no and uh, propaganda after propaganda, all on the backs of the taxpayers. Now, me, I really wish I had a way when I was filing my taxes, I could say, look, I want my taxes to not go toward dropping bombs on brown babies in foreign countries, and I don't want my taxes to go to arresting non-violent drug offenders. Put my money toward the social services, put my money towards something besides that. I don't want it funding and subsidizing oil companies or automotive manufacturers. I really don't think tax dollars should be subsidizing the private sector. Um, but we don't have those choices, do we? So they take our tax dollars, they take probably over 50 cents of every tax dollar and they put it into the war machine. And the rest of it goes into all the other stuff. And that's only what they tell us about. And the CIA has lots of stuff they don't. So that's my conspiracy theory bullshit at the moment. Again, a couple of years later, Attorney General Eric Holder says the U.S. government will continue to vigorously enforce federal law. And these are predominantly marijuana laws. And this is, again, after California becomes the first state to legalize medical marijuana use. During those first few years, and even not too long ago, they were still having issues with federal law enforcement coming in and raiding their dispensaries, even though the state and the voters in that state said, we're okay with it. But the federal government wanted to come and stick their nose and steal from people and that kind of stuff. They wanted to be the boss. Ah, so, same year after Eric Holder is going to vigorously enforce California Proposition 19 would legalize recreational marijuana use for those over the age of 21 in non-public spaces. So you can't be like standing out in the street smoking a joint. And they also had home growing. Oh, that was defeated home grow at that time. And as you can see, as we're going through the more recent history, there's now changing laws. Um, Washington, Colorado legalized in 2012. The Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment was the first time implemented. That has passed every year since. That is an annual vote. Alaska and Oregon also then legalized for recreational in November 14. Um, it claims here in 2015 the federal government removes obstacles for marijuana research. Um, I'm not sure what the hell that's talking about because it has been approximately 5 years now where the DEA, is it 4 or 5? Maybe it is 5. The DEA said they were going to start accepting applications to allow for more research and also more positive research. And in the 4, at least, if not 5 years since then, um, they have not responded to a single application, and they've received hundreds and hundreds of applications to do research for marijuana. As some of you may know, the problem with research under DEA's permission, you have to use marijuana from the University of Mississippi, which many consider as nowhere near equivalent to what's available in the dispensaries today. Um, I really think, and again, this is my opinion, and probably many of you agree, the DEA needs to get out of the way. The DEA needs to deschedule completely and allow research to be done because you cannot get FDA approval without research. The FDA approval starts with submitting research. And if the DEA is going to block research, they're an enforcement agency. They are not a scientific agency. They are not a medical agency. They are an enforcement agency. And all they're doing is being bullies by saying we're going to enforce this unconstitutional and illogical law. Um, Again, they claim that they've removed obstacles from research, but most of the research, if you see it, is going to be from outside of the United States. And in 2016, DEA declines to reschedule. I think that just happened again. The Supreme Court. Oh, somebody asked a couple of our meetings ago about the Supreme Court and some hearings. And I looked into that. I don't have it in front of me now, but apparently later that week, the Supreme Court declined to hear a case about rescheduling or descheduling or something marijuana. They just declined to hear it. And that's kind of the way our Justice Department works sometimes. Um, they stick their fingers in there going, la, 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 we don't want to listen. La, 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 la. At least that's the way I see it. November 16, California legalizes recreational, and that is all they have in this article from 2017. I'm going to kind of switch over to this next one here. And this next article, again, talks a little bit about the racist history. We've touched on it briefly. Again, it was a lot of it more in the early days, a lot more, and I didn't go into Harry Anslinger a whole lot in the 1930s. Harry Anslinger was the head of a drug enforcement agency. I don't remember the name of it exactly at this point. Um, and they were going to stop funding his organization, and he had to find a new demon, a new cause to fight, and that's when he picked up on the marijuana um, concept. The jazz drug. I love when they call it jazz cabbage is one of my favorite names for marijuana. Um, this is basically this article that I'm sharing here is basically somebody who wrote a book a couple years back. Actually, this came out June of 2020, so the book was out recently, earlier this year. Um, and it's a short history of marijuana. And they go into, again, a little bit about how the war on drugs was to target blacks and brown Americans and to, again, the political left. Um, the protests and policies debates across the nation seek to change both the outcomes, practices, and processes. Um, One thing I did like about this little article here, and again, I can share the link to it here for you in our chat. Chat. How do I get the chat from where I am? There we go. Again, this kind of goes into the early stages where they were starting to say, the government describes cannabis as a drug for the inner city and for blacks while they're also lying about it. Uh, Lying about it leading to rape and murder and insanity. And of course, we've got political opponents like Nixon and Reagan designed the law enforcement to target a variety of groups across the country. Um, Numbers may be slightly different than what we see, but here black Americans arrested for cannabis offenses at a rate of 4 to 1. We've usually seen a number of about 3.5 times more likely to be arrested on a national average. I don't know if that went up to 3.6. Here in South Carolina, on overall, is that number is 3.2 times more likely. But we do have some counties here in South Carolina where people are 7 and 8 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis offenses if they're a person of color compared to white users. And you got to consider that we're in a nation where we've got about a 13% population of blacks compared to about a 61% population of whites. And yet, there is a larger population of blacks in jail for simple marijuana use. And they use it, whites and blacks use it at similar rates. Um, on our Facebook group page, I will often post about things like this, and I must admit it saddens me when I see people start commenting about why'd you got to bring waste into it when you're talking about cannabis, marijuana law reform. And like I say, it saddens me because I think a lot of these people don't realize that racism was a big part behind it, why we have it today. Um, my gripe is we can get our government to tear down these racist statues that are standing in the middle of our public parks and things like that. Why can't we get them to just repeal this racist law? Repeal this shit completely, wipe it out. But they don't want to do that. They can't possibly do that. Admit that they lied all these years. Um, so, what I did like about this other article, and I'm going to kind of leave it to y'all to go and read it for your own, since I shared the link here, but is that they're talking about the future of cannabis policy in the United States, how while we're moving forward, uh, criminal record expungement has got to be an automatic and included thing. One thing with the MORE Act at federal level addresses expungement at the state and local level. Some of you or many of you may already know that only about 5% of marijuana related arrests are federal offenses. About 95% of those arrests are state and local um, level crimes, state level crimes, basically. And so what the MORE Act does is it addresses that. It directs those local um, district attorney's offices to start working on the expungement process. And the MORE Act includes funding to fund that expungement process. Um, I say it quite often when I'm commenting on news articles or posts that I say online is marijuana decriminalization, marijuana reform is a key element in criminal justice reform. We can't have criminal justice reform, good, clear criminal justice reform until we have, good marijuana law reform. Um, I was watching I don't know if it was an article, video type thing a couple of days ago, and they were talking about laws in the United States and that there are over 10,000 criminal offenses in this country. Um, and again, many of you may know I have a tendency to watch First Amendment, Second Amendment, but constitutional amendment audit videos. Um, and so watching some of these is also kind of giving me that same. Sorry, while I read something. Same kind of concepts. There's just all fight. They're out there fighting for free speech. The First Amendment predominantly because they're going out as journalists, trying to gather content for stories, and then you have government agents coming in and trying to censor them by telling them, "Oh, you can't video this building, you can't video inside the lobby of this courthouse," things like that. And the other thing I do often see on those videos is there are judges' orders at certain courthouses that ban video. Now, I think if it states that it's inside the courtroom, they're allowed to do that. But if it's something that says you can't video on court property or anywhere in the building, that is a violation of First Amendment rights. These are our buildings. We pay for them with our taxes. We should be able to come into any of the public common areas and take a look around and see what our public servants are doing on the taxpayer dime. Um, Again, those are kind of interesting to watch because we have a number of different types of auditors out there, and they they behave differently. Some are very, some say nothing. Silent audits, they like to call them. You have a right to remain silent, so they do. So they might have enforcers coming up and questioning them, and they just decline to answer. Um, and so to watch what happens with our public servants in those situations is quite interesting. Um, Let me just kind of go down here real quick on this. Next, they talk about state taxing cannabis heavily. Some of them are actually taxing pretty high, especially for recreational use. I'm hoping that that sort of moderates because the taxing at a high rate really is benefiting the black market more, I think. Let's make it reasonable taxes. And then let's take those tax dollars and unfortunately, unlike the Compassionate Care Act bill that's been submitted to South Carolina a number of times, they want to take 50% of the tax revenues in that particular bill and just hand it off to South Carolina Law Enforcement Division and the 46 county sheriff's offices. That's half of all the generated tax revenues. And when I say it sounds like extortion or a buy-off, I've heard some of our legislators actually respond back to me going, "Oh no, it's to implement programs." I don't buy it. I'm not buying it. That's millions of dollars are going to be generated. And to be quite honest with you, I don't think that I have very little faith. I mean, just look at Charleston County, Charleston Police Department. They just spent $1 million tax dollars so they could encrypt their radio system. So now it makes it harder for us to keep an eye on it. It makes transparency more difficult. Um, this is something that reporters would use to kind of find out what's going on with the news. They listen to the scanners and go follow up. But now that's all scrambled. It's all encrypted. And why is that? Because of the paranoia of our enforcement agencies. They're afraid that the um, criminal elements are going to listen to the scanners and use them for their benefit. And that may be a possibility, but you're still infringing on the rights of the public, of the citizenry, to know what our law enforcement agencies are doing um, out there on our tax dollars. And with that in mind, we do have a criminal justice system that does, even here in Charleston, especially here in Charleston, well, especially here in South Carolina, um, arrest at there's a disparity in arrest between the whites and people of color. So, um, kind of a little line on the end of this little article here. The history of cannabis policy demonstrates that racism was institutionalized and enforced in specific communities, and is now legalization that must institutionalize the means for their recovery. Um, One of the things that we do kind of talk about when our meetings with national is trying to influence the legislation that's going on in our own state. Um, and a lot of times they will talk about making sure that you implement timelines in there, because there's been some states that say, oh, yeah, we're going to put in a dispensary system, or we're going to make distribution available, blah, blah, blah. And then because there's no deadlines and no timelines, they drag their feet and they try and avoid it. And although the taxpayers and the voters have voted for legalization of whether medical or recreational in those particular states, it still seems to be legislators at times will do what they can to obstruct the process. And so those are things where, again, uh, I'm waiting to see what happens in the coming months with the new version of the Compassionate Care Act. Um, it's been brought up to the authors of that legislation more than once about the um, those tax issues, along with some other issues in that legislation that really is not beneficial to our community. And we'll see if we can maybe get some of those amendments taken care of. And again, with elections a week away, week and a half away, not even a half. We'll see who gets into those seats. We'll see what we can do about addressing new legislators that have come on board and getting maybe a better medical marijuana bill drafted, something that may give the Compassionate Care Act a run for its money. Um, I hate to say it that way, because I'd really like to see the Compassionate Care Act amended and fit the bill better. I just don't see that happening. I know Senator Davis has stated a number of times he wants to draw a very hard line between medical marijuana and recreational. And I really believe that there needs to be a hard line at, let's decriminalize this, let's get medical, and let's not worry and stress about recreational. It's coming. It's going to come. Deal with it. At least if I have anything to say about it. So, um, that's kind of what I got tonight on civil rights, civil liberties. Again, that's why I really do a lot of this. Is it's not just because I want to be able to stand out my front porch and smoke a joint or something like that, and not get arrested if somebody smells it or sees it or get turned in. It's because it's just wrong. I mean, I was brought up that there's supposed to be life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, freedom, and justice for all. And yet here I am at 60 plus years old, and I'm not seeing what they told me we were supposed to be happening here in our world. And um, and that's why I do what I do, because I really want to see a better place for your kids. Mine are already pretty much grown. They're stuck with the world the way it is too. Uh, any comments, input, insights? I do have a couple of nice comments. I want to thank Vaughn for, again, commenting about us bringing in the racial issues. I, to me, it's a big part of the issue. And to be quite honest with y'all, um, I moved to Charleston less than 5 years ago. I lived in Pennsylvania. I lived just north of the Mason-Dixon line. I lived in a farm community, kind of rural area for the most part. And I was not well versed, well educated, well aware. Let's just say I was sheltered from a lot of the racism that was probably going on in some towns and cities and stuff around me. Um, it wasn't until I kind of moved to Charleston that I started putting some of these pieces together. Um, again, when I lived up north, it was the Republicans and the Democrats were just more liberal, and the Republicans were more conservative. And it really wasn't until I kind of came here that I realized there's also let's see if I can phrase it correctly. There's also a bit of a I guess I'll call it what it is. There's a color difference between the two parties for the most part. It seems that the Republican Party leans, or is a lot more white based, and the Democrat Party at least has a stronger black following. I don't see. I mean, I don't know because I see both colors in both in the Democratic Party, but again, like I say, it's all part of my learning experience. This actually, I'm glad I kind of caught this before I got too far. This was another thing that I got in the mail about a year or two ago from somebody in California who I asked them to send me a little California gift at one point, and included in the gift was a video. The video is called "The Great Debaters." And this is Denzel Washington, Forrest Whitaker, one of the best pictures of the year, powerful, inspiring, according to Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times, back in, let's see if I can find a date on this thing, 2007, The Great Debaters. And what I kind of learned while watching this is back in I want to say the early 30s, maybe. Um, Inspired by a true story, Washington shines as a brilliant but politically radical debate team coach who uses the power of words to transform a group of underdog African American college students into a historical powerhouse that took on the Harvard elite, featuring a superb cast, blah, blah, blah. But from my understanding, is some of this early debating in this true story of developing um, these students into becoming why am I struggling for words here today? Eloquent and accurate debaters was actually some of the early start of the civil rights movement that followed. Um, so I found that a very interesting video. Again, I got it by surprise. I had no clue what was coming or what it was about until I watched it, and now I keep sharing with people because I found it a very inspiring video. So the Great Debaters, if you ever get a chance to watch it. Um,
Hey Scott, I did have something I wanted to mention. This is Vaughn Postema.
Hi, Vaughn.
Hi. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
That's good. That's good. I just, of course, I'm listening, and I always appreciate it when there is, just like I put in the chat. I'm always appreciative when we talk about cannabis, and especially in light of how closely it is connected, if not directly, a racist issue. It's a racist law, just the prohibition in itself. And I just wanted to, if anything, chime in to say that that's very important. And it's not something that, I know sometimes I get the same kind of conversation too. And it says, well, why you have to bring race in it? And it's because that's what it is. Like that's the simple answer is that it's because that's exactly what it is, and that's what it was intended to be, and that's what the propaganda was built around. And so in terms of kind of that moving forward, I know for us, one of the biggest things over here is that pushing for that decriminalization, I think is a huge step. And I think it will mean a lot to a lot of people that are constantly abused by this law, by our government on local levels, especially. I think that decriminalization is that first key, is that first step. So I just, if anything, just kind of wanted to echo my agreement with that.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that because yes, actually, decriminalization is a key. I think I mentioned it in last week's meeting, or maybe it was meeting before that. Moving forward in the new year, as much as we will support medical marijuana legislation that comes in, we as normal are looking for, broader law reform than just that. And I will be pushing hard for any decriminalization bills that we can get drafted this coming round. I know there was at least 3 of them last round. And what I'd like to see is all of those legislators get together and just kind of have one that they all kind of get the ball rolling on, and we will push that hard as we can. Because my opinion is the criminalization for small amounts, like less than an ounce, are just a tool that law enforcement uses to be able to search your vehicle, to civil asset forfeiture your ass. I was actually listening to, I believe it was a union representative for law enforcement a few weeks ago on a meeting, and they were talking about civil asset forfeiture and how I believe it was like 85% or more. I think it was at least 85% of all civil asset forfeitures are for $1,000 or less. And civil asset forfeiture laws were really developed to go after those international kingpins who weren't in our country, so that we could lock up their assets, so that we could kind of hinder them doing business. And instead, our law enforcement goes into our urban communities and finds some guy with a joint in his pocket and steals his hoopty and his gold chains. That's not what those laws were put into place for. And yet that's exactly what here in South Carolina they're being used for the most part. And I just saw another, I think it was a Greenville sheriff or sheriff's candidate. Again, just did I see Al Cannon say it too? They still support civil asset forfeiture. They don't see anything wrong with it. As a matter of fact, that union rep that I was telling you about, he actually called it. He used the words legal civil asset forfeiture. Now, why he had to tack the word legal on there, I'm not quite sure, except for the fact that he probably knows in the back of his mind that civil asset forfeiture is unconstitutional. If it's unconstitutional, it's not legal. But because the police do it and some other Justice Department lackey, some judge somewhere says, oh, I'll say it's okay for you to do it. Now they're breaking the law is no longer breaking the law. It's legal crime. I'll call it legal crime. And again, I do go off on that tangent quite often. It's not law enforcement. I believe in law and order. I believe in good cops. I do not approve of our justice system and the way it operates. And it's really a systematic. It's a systemic problem. It's not just law enforcement agencies. It's the rest of the judicial system that are kind of tied into this whole thing. And I'll kind of sidetrack real quick. One of the points I like to make on that, you'll see statistics sometimes where they'll talk about the number of drug users in drug rehab, and they'll give this pretty high number for marijuana convictions in drug rehab. But what you have to keep in mind, these people are not in drug rehab voluntarily. They're there because it's a court order. Most cannabis consumers realize they don't need to go to rehab. It's not a rehab issue in those cases. You got caught with a joint, big deal. But it's another way for agencies to generate money and share that money with other groups, medical agencies like that. And it's a way for the judicial department to demand control. And so it's a way for them to manipulate statistics. And that statistics is manipulate. Look at the number of marijuana users rehab.
Hey, Scott, I think you're starting to break up a little bit on the audio. I don't know if that's only me.
It might be me. Can you hear me okay now?
No, it's still bad.
Still bad. All right. Let me unplug and replug my mic. Okay, let's try that again. Any
There
better?
you go. You're rocking and rolling now.
Cool. All right. All right. So where was I just complaining about? Oh, civil asset forfeiture stuff. And again, racial disparity in the use of that. Yeah, like I say, they're taking small amounts from a majority of black and brown people in the South Carolina, and then you've got sheriffs like the Greenville sheriff, and I believe it was may have been Al Cannon here in Charleston County as well. Saying, hey, we think civil asset forfeiture is a good thing and a needed thing. And again, you may disagree with me. I doubt you do, but I think civil asset forfeiture is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. You're supposed to be secure in your person and your papers and your property. And if they're going to go ahead and seize your property without charging you with a crime, instead they charge the property with the crime. That's not how the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution is supposed to work. So any kind of actually there were some last time too that I didn't see passing any kind of civil asset forfeiture reform laws that we see coming through here in South Carolina again this year. We'll keep you updated. We'll keep you posted. We're going to push hard on criminal aspects, decriminalization, and definitely on civil asset forfeiture stuff. And medical, if we get a happier bill again. If not, we'll stay where in the position we've been here in South Carolina for the past 4 years since I've been running NORML. This NORML group is we support, but we think it needs amendments. So we're lukewarm on that particular legislation. But that's kind of what I got for you tonight. Geez, I managed talking your ear off for an hour here. That was fun. No plans for next week yet. I will try to get a little bit ahead of the game and share some sort of topic a little ahead beforehand. We will be days before the election, so expect a little bit of political talk next Sunday. But again, days before the election, I'm not going to be changing anybody's mind. Either you vote for marijuana or you don't. I've already mailed my stuff in. I've already made my votes. I really wish I had some better candidates to vote for under some circumstances, but I also know some candidates that I wanted to hopefully get out of there. So hopefully my votes will help that. And I hope yours will too. So if you haven't already, don't forget to either early vote or get out on November 3rd. And otherwise, I will look for y'all here next Sunday at 7 o'clock. I believe that's November 1st. And thank you again for joining me. If you have any questions or comments, email me at lowcountrynormal@gmail.com or visit our website at normalsc.com.